The deep dive. Today, we're heading into the Caucasus Mountains, metaphorically speaking,
Right.
to really unpack a conflict that's, well, incredibly complex and often brutal. Chechnya's long struggle against the Russian Federation.
It's a crucial piece of post-Soviet history, definitely.
We're looking at almost 2 decades of defiance here. You've got this small nation, barely over 1 million people,
Mm-hmm.
and they're locked in what the sources often call an epic struggle. It's about faith, freedom, against, well, the sheer power of the Russian state.
From the Soviet collapse right through to about 2009.
Exactly. We've pulled together various articles, historical accounts to try and piece together this history.
Yeah, it's quite a story.
Our mission really is to distill the key moments, the strategy, the profound shifts that happened within the Chechen resistance itself over that time.
Because it wasn't static.
No, not at all.
Here it
And this
goes.
isn't just like military history. It's about a people, their identity, and the incredible cost of fighting for survival. So, okay, let's get into it.
And I think you hit on the key point there, identity. That's really the starting point the sources emphasize.
Okay.
The Chechen identity itself is just forged in this fierce independence and a really deep-rooted connection to Islam.
So this resistance wasn't just born in the 90s.
Oh, no, not at all. It stretches back centuries,
Yeah.
long before the modern wars we're focusing on today. It's deep in their history.
Right, that makes sense. So where do we first see that really cemented, that sort of historical tenacity?
Well, you have to go back to the 19th century. During the Russian Empire's push into the Caucasus, colonization efforts,
Okay.
the Chechens, along with other groups there, they put up this extraordinary decades-long fight.
Decades, wow.
Yeah. And the key example, the one everyone points to, is the Caucasian Imam, led by Imam Shamil, legendary figure.
Imam Shamil, right, I've heard the name.
His defiance against the Tsar's huge armies, it became this foundational story for them. A symbol that, well, Chechens resist outside rule. It's who they are.
So that memory, that cultural narrative of resisting someone like Shamil, it's just baked in.
Absolutely. It makes that desire for sovereignty incredibly potent when the Soviet Union starts to, fall apart.
Which brings us to 1991, a massive moment.
Huge. The collapse of the USSR was, for the Chechens, potentially their biggest opportunity. That dream of independence, always there but suppressed.
Suddenly seemed possible.
Exactly. It felt like their time had finally come.
And the figurehead for this hope was, well, he was complicated, wasn't he? Jokhar Dudayev.
Very. A former major general in the Soviet Air Force, if you can believe it.
The Soviet general leading the independence movement. How does that work?
The sources kind of highlight this complexity. Dudayev represented a generation that, they were part of the Soviet system, even high up in the military.
But they never lost that Chechen identity.
Precisely. He used his position, his political savvy, to seize that moment, declared the independence of the Chechen Republic of Ishkuria.
Ishkuria.
And they had this brief window, maybe 3 years or so, of de facto self-rule, a real moment of hope.
But back in Moscow, Boris Yeltsin saw this hope very differently.
As an existential threat, basically.
So, just to be clear for everyone listening, Yeltsin wasn't just worried about Chechnya itself, he saw it as a potential first domino.
That's exactly how the documents frame it. If Chechnya goes, Yeltsin feared, well, what's next? Tatarstan, Dagestan. Dozens of other regions might try to break away.
Leading to the complete fragmentation of the Russian Federation.
Which was his nightmare scenario. But it wasn't just about preventing fragmentation, though that was huge.
Okay, what else?
Strategy. Location, location, location. Right. Chechnya sits right across crucial oil pipelines.
Oh, the pipelines.
Yeah, and trade routes through the Caucasus. These weren't minor pipelines. They were absolutely vital for Russia's post-Soviet energy economy, getting oil and gas to international markets.
So losing Chechnya meant potentially losing control over those flows.
Exactly. From Moscow's view, it was a strategic asset they simply couldn't afford to lose. Non-negotiable.
Okay, that sets the stage for the aggression. December 1994, the First Chechen War begins. Russia invades.
And they went in expecting, well, a quick win.
Like rolling over a small, poorly equipped region.
That was the assumption. Tanks, overwhelming firepower. They thought it would be decisive.
And instead?
Instead, they hit a brick wall. The resistance was incredibly fierce. Unexpectedly so.
And these weren't like a regular army they were facing?
Not at all. The sources describe them as ordinary men, even boys, defending their homes, their land, their faith, not a conventional military force.
And their tactics? They really leveled the playing field, didn't they, against Russia's brute force?
Completely neutralized it in many ways. The Russian military was just unprepared for Chechen guerrilla tactics.
They knew the terrain.
Intimately. The
Okay.
mountains, yeah. But also, crucially, urban warfare. They became masters of it.
Grozny, the capital.
They deliberately turned Grozny into what sources call a deadly labyrinth.
Wow.
Yeah. No big battles, just ambushes, hit and run, constant harassment, making the city itself a weapon.
Even though Russia was using massive firepower. You mentioned scorched earth tactics.
Oh, absolutely. Artillery, air power. The documents suggest it was used with little restraint, immense destruction, but it didn't break their will.
Which brings us back to that will. It feels like we need to dig into that resilience. You mentioned faith earlier. How significant was the spiritual dimension?
It's central. You can't understand the resistance without it. The war was political, yes, but for the fighters, it was also framed as jihad.
Okay, and we need to be careful with that word. What did it mean in this specific context, according to the source material?
Right, exactly. The sources are quite clear. This wasn't about aggressive expansionism. It was understood as a sacred duty, a defensive struggle.
For what?
For Din, their religion, their way of life, and Watan, their homeland. It was about dignity, the right to practice Islam freely, the right to just live on their land without external control.
So that deep spiritual conviction gave them a strength
That baffled their enemies. It allowed them to endure suffering and brutality that, frankly, would have crushed most forces.
And this combination, the spiritual drive, the effective tactics, it led to something nobody really expected.
The unthinkable, yeah. 1996, Russia withdraws.
A humiliating defeat is how it's often described.
It really was. And Chechnya essentially regained its de facto independence, a stunning outcome.
But bought at a terrible price.
An unimaginable cost in blood and destruction. And as we saw soon after, that peace.
Yeah.
It was incredibly fragile. It didn't last.
No. That window, that brief hope, it slammed shut pretty quickly. Which leads us into the Second Chechen War.
Just 3 years later, 1999.
And the trigger, or at least the stated trigger cited by Moscow.
We have to mention it, yeah. A
Yeah.
series of horrific apartment bombings in Russian cities. Moscow, Volgodonsk.
Creating this climate of intense fear and anger in Russia.
Absolutely. And the invasion was launched very swiftly by the then newly appointed Prime Minister, Vladimir Putin.
And this time, Russia wasn't making the same mistakes.
No, they'd learned the tactics were different, much, much more brutal.
Oh, so.
Overwhelming sustained force, but also a strategic shift towards what's often called collective punishment. Meaning targeting not just fighters, but the civilian population perceived to be supporting them, trying to break the will of the entire society.
And the destruction. Grozny again?
Grozny in the Second War. It was even worse. Systematically flattened, bombed, shelled until it was just rubble. It earned that awful title, the most destroyed city on Earth at that time.
That level of violence.
Mm-hmm.
It must have had profound consequences beyond the physical destruction.
It did. And this leads to maybe the most tragic aspect of the whole story, according to the sources, the shift within the resistance itself.
You mean radicalization?
Exactly. That initial movement, the nationalist one under Dudayev, fighting for Ichkeria, it started to change, tragically transformed.
How did that happen? What caused that shift?
Well, the sources point to a couple of things. First, the sheer brutality, the desperation it created. Second, Russia's policy of targeting and eliminating the original nationalist leaders.
Creating a vacuum.
A vacuum, yeah. An ideological one and also a resource one. As the violence just grounds on and the original leadership was gone, well, new actors emerged.
Foreign fighters.
Foreign fighters, yes. And with them came different ideologies, more extreme, transnational Islamist ideas, not necessarily focused just on Chechen independence.
And they found fertile ground because
they offered resources, money, weapons, and a hardened ideology that promised continued resistance against this overwhelming Russian force when maybe other options seemed exhausted.
So the sources directly link this radicalization to the extreme violence they were facing.
Crucially, yes. It's presented as a direct result of the violence and the desperate circumstances. The original indigenous struggle for independence and dignity started getting, well, co-opted, hijacked even, by forces with different, broader agendas.
So the very tactics meant to crush the resistance actually ended up twisting it into something else, something potentially more problematic for Russia in the long run, maybe.
That's certainly an interpretation the sources allow for. It became a different kind of fight.
And this second war just dragged on.
For years, until about 2009 officially. The toll on civilians was immense. Families destroyed, the entire social fabric just torn apart.
How about 2009?
By 2009, Russia had effectively consolidated control. They installed a pro-Russian government, led by the Kadyrovs, and declared the counterterrorism operation, their term for the war, officially over.
So, looking back now at this whole period, 94 to 2009, what's the takeaway? What does this incredibly intense struggle signify?
Well, on one level, it's just a staggering testament to the power of will. A small nation holding out for so long against such overwhelming odds.
It's hard not to be struck by that sheer resistance,
Yeah.
but it's also a story of just profound suffering.
Immense suffering, sacrifice, a deeply wounded land and people.
But you also mentioned earlier it became a symbol beyond Chechnya.
Yeah, if you connect it to the bigger picture, the sources suggest that even though the independent Ichkeria was crushed, the struggle itself resonated globally, particularly in the Muslim world. For many, it became this modern-day example, rightly or wrongly perceived, of believers drawing strength from faith to stand up to a powerful oppressor.
So a source of inspiration, despite the outcome.
But the ultimate takeaway maybe is more somber. It's a reminder, the sources seem to say, of the strength people draw from their identity, national, religious, and the dangers inherent in trying to forcibly erase that.
Moscow established physical control.
Yes, but the documents emphasize that the spirit of resistance, the memory, the scars of this centuries-long struggle that remains embedded deep within the Chechen nation.
It really shows how a political fight can morph almost inevitably into something deeper, something spiritual, when survival is on the line.
And critically, how extreme violence from the outside can twist the internal nature of that resistance, often in tragic ways.
Which leaves us with a really important question, something for you, the listener, to think about as you explore this more. Given that the sources stress this enduring spirit, this identity, what are the real long-term costs, not just military, but social, political, for a major power when it chooses to forcibly suppress a deep-rooted national and religious identity?
Instead of finding ways to accommodate it.
Exactly. What does this Chechen chapter tell us about the actual limits of overwhelming military force when it comes up against cultural memory and identity?
History often suggests that kind of suppression just hardens identity, doesn't it? Makes it go underground, perhaps, but doesn't erase it.
Something to definitely ponder. We really encourage you to look deeper into the sources, especially those that detail the human cost, the personal stories from these wars.
They're powerful accounts.
Thank you for diving deep with us today on this incredibly complex and important history.